आदाब नाजरीन, न्यूज़ 16 डिजिटल में आप सभी का खैर मकदम किया जाता है। बेंगलोर शहर में नया ऑडिटोरियम कन्नड़ा भवन में 27 फरवरी पीर के दिन एक जलसा मुनक्किद किया गया और इस जलसे में जनाब खलील मामून साहब की मुंतखब शुदा उर्दू नज़मों को इंग्लिश में ट्रांसलेट किया गया और इस इंग्लिश में ट्रांसलेट की गई किताब का नाम है विस्पर्स ऑफ सरस्वती। इस जलसे में इस किताब को लॉन्च किया गया है। इस किताब को दो शायरों ने मिलकर इंग्लिश में ट्रांसलेट किया है। एक तो कन्नड़ा के मशहूर शायर हैं एच.एस. शिव प्रकाश सर और दूसरे हैं उर्दू के बेहतरीन शायर और मुतरजम जनाब माहिर मंसूर साहब। इन दोनों ने मिलकर इस किताब को इंग्लिश में ट्रांसलेट किया है। बता दें कि जनाब खलील मामून साहब बर्रे सगीर के जाने माने मशहूर व मारूफ नुमाइंदा शायर हैं। खलील मामून साहब की अब तक 8 किताबें शाया हो चुकी हैं। उर्दू अदब में इनकी पहचान एक नज़म गो शायर की हैसियत से की जाती है। बता दें कि उनकी एक शीरी किताब आफाक की तरफ के लिए उन्हें सेंट्रल साहित्य अकेडमी अवार्ड से भी नवाजा गया है। जनाब एस.आर. रामकृष्ण जो कि नामवर सहाफ़ी और मुतरजम हैं, उन्होंने इस किताब विस्पर्स ऑफ सरस्वती का इजरा किया और अपने ख्यालात का इजहार भी किया। बता दें कि इस जलसे में एक जवान उभरते हुए फिल्म मेकर B.A. समवर्ता और डॉक्टर अजय कुमार सिंह ने इस किताब का तफसीली जायजा लिया। आइए देखते और जानते हैं इस प्रोग्राम से जुड़ी मजीद तफसीलात।
By name Karwan Yadav. So that organization would like to felicitate Mr. Khaleel Mamoon. Please come. Good evening to everyone. We are going to start this book release function. I request all the guests and dignitaries to come on the dais. Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh, Mr. Khaleel Mamoon, Mr. S.R. Ramakrishna, Shri H.S. Shiv Prakash, Shrimati Manju, B.A. Samvartha. Please come. Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh will preside over this book release function. Mr. S.R. Ramakrishna will launch the book and will also speak about the translation. Mr. B.A. Samvartha. I welcome all the guests and dignitaries on the dais and all the persons who are present in the hall. And I request Shrimati Manju Venkatesh, Hindi poet, to come on the dais and present the roses to our guests. President of the function, Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh. Please. Our guest, Mr. M.R. S.R. Ramakrishna, is sitting next to Mr. Ajay Kumar Singh. Mr. Khaleel Mamoon. Mr. H.S. Shiv Prakash. S.R. Ramakrishna, who is a well-known journalist, right now working as associate editor of the Deccan Herald. Name of the book of translations is Whispers of Saraswati. I request Mr. S.R. Ramakrishna to launch the book and speak about it.
Good evening and namaskara. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today in the midst of all the literary titans. It is Shiv Prakash sir who actually gave the book to me and asked me to come and speak here today. The poet Khaleel Mamoon sir and Ajay Kumar Singh sir and Samvartha, who I met at the Deccan Herald Changemakers event, and he is one of the changemakers that we recognize as part of our annual initiative. And my very good friend from my Jayanagar days, which is where my friend Malhar and his brother both have been living in Jayanagar for a long time. I think he lives elsewhere now. So thank you. It's an honor and a privilege, as I said. There are people here who read the book closely and who will be speaking about it. I will just speak a little about the difficulties of translation, the challenges of translation. And as we all know, Shiv Prakash is a very distinguished translator. He's translated across languages. And this book that he recently translated, which is I Keep Vigil of Rudra, is one of the very important contributions to translation in Kannada. He's taken vachanas from the 12th century and then translated them into English. And then we've also had A.K. Ramanujan, who's translated vachanas from Kannada to English. So I have read poems in this book, and I like some of them particularly for the sort of ironic tone that they bring. As you will soon see when you read the poems, Khaleel Mamoon's poetry is modernist in many ways, and then it's also ironic for that particular reason. So I will just talk a bit about the problems of translation, the challenges of translation, the thrills of translation. So the first thing that there are many challenges. I will just concentrate on 2 or 3 of them. The first problem or the challenge of translation is when we talk about equivalence, translation as equivalence, the difficulty of trying to find equivalence in a language that is far removed from the source language. There's a source language and there's a target language, and then in many cases they are far removed. In some cases they are very closely aligned, they might be sister languages. So for example, if we are translating between Kannada and Tamil or Kannada and Telugu, because they stem from the same Proto-Dravidian roots, it might be easier for us to work with the syntax and lexis, that is the word order and the vocabulary of these languages. But when the languages are as far removed as, say, Urdu and English, Kannada and English, the challenges get a little more complicated. One of the things that I frequently run into, and I speak from my experience of translating from Kannada to English, is the loss of meaning. How do you cope with this inevitable loss of meaning between 2 languages? I will just illustrate with a few things from my memory. There's an Akka Mahadevi Vachana. ತೆರಳಿಯ ಹುಳು ತನ್ನ ಸ್ನೇಹದಿಂದ ತನ್ನ ಮನೆಯ ಮಾಡಿ ತನ್ನ ನೂಲು ತನ್ನನ್ನೇ ಸುತ್ತಿ ಸಾವಂತೆ ಮನಬಂಧುದ ಬಯಸಿ ಬೇವುತ್ತಿರುವೆನಯ್ಯ. So in this poem, almost all the words are in Kannada, and there's one particularly striking word, sneha, which is in Sanskrit. So sneha, of course, as we all know, means love and affection, but if you look up the dictionary, there are many other meanings, one of which is also the gum that the silkworm produces. So when you say ತೆರಳಿಯ ಹುಳು ತನ್ನ ಸ್ನೇಹದಿಂದ ತನ್ನ ಮನೆಯ ಮಾಡಿ ತನ್ನ ನೂಲು ತನ್ನನ್ನೇ ಸುತ್ತಿ ಸಾವಂತೆ, then sneha here is both love, both affection, love and affection, and the gum that it uses, the spittle that it uses to build its home. So it's the sound, it's the way the words are arranged. So when we try to translate, which is ninne dina nanna jana, like a mountain and there is the sound of the poetry. The 70s, he was just telling me, and then these are select poems from his body of work. I'll just conclude by reading one poem that I particularly liked. So it's called Urdu Dinner. It was an Urdu dinner on the crossroads. Tablecloth was spread. There was biryani, butanjan. Am I getting it right? Sweets, brinjal curry. All had gathered. Poets, pseudo-poets and lamenters. Those who make others weep and those who sing. I was also there. I had had a few drinks. Everybody pounced on the food as though they were starved for centuries. I too had enough food and satisfied my belly as though I was hungry since my birth. I did not know why, while eating, my mother's 40th day death ritual overpowered my mind. So it's a very tender poem. It's a very ironic poem, and I'm sure Shiv Prakash sir and the translators who worked on this must have pondered about what it's saying, how it's saying, and what are the sounds that say it. Thank you again, sir, for giving me this opportunity. We are usually, caught up in the newsroom, and thank you for pulling me out of the newsroom and to come and be in the midst of distinguished people, writers, poets. So thank you, and thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. S.R. Ramakrishna. Being himself a very well-known translator of poetry, he spoke about the challenge. He also recited one poem, his Urdu poem, Urdu Dinner. मेरा ख्याल है उसका उन्वान है उर्दू का खाना था. ये काफ़ी उनकी मशहूर नज़्म है और उसमें वो जो आयरनी है उसका भी जिक्र S.R. Ramakrishna साहब ने किया. The poems of Mr. Khaleel Mamoon are very long. For non-Urdu literary students, when we say Kavita in Hindi and Kannada, it is only poetry. But here in Urdu, Nazm, there are so many forms. Ghazal, Musnavi, Qasida, Marsiya. So Mr. Khaleel Mamoon, though he has written Ghazals also, but he is basically known as a modern Urdu poet of Nazm. Nazm के वो शायर के तौर पर जाने जाते हैं. And his poems are very long, so I cannot recite his poems. But because he has written ghazals also, and each couplet of ghazal is independent, just to make you comfortable or enjoy this function, I would like to recite in between some couplets of his ghazal. This particular couplet I like very much. दर्द के सहारे कब तलक चलेंगे, दर्द के सहारे कब तलक चलेंगे, सांस रुक रही है, फासला बड़ा है. So after Mr. S.R. Ramakrishna, we had invited well-known journalist Mr. Sachidanand Murthy as chief guest. For some personal reason, he could not come, but he is kind enough to send us his writer about this book. So I request Mr. B.A. He has written in Kannada, I can pronounce it properly, Samvartha. Mr. B.A. Samvartha is a well-known film script writer, film scholar and translator of poetry. He is a young boy, as we can see. So first he will read out the write-up of Mr. Sachidanand Murthy, who himself is a well-known journalist at the national level, and he was resident editor of The Week, which is a very famous magazine. Recently he retired and moved from Delhi to Bangalore. He is a widely read person in all kinds of subjects and great passion for poetry. So now I request Mr. B.A. Samvartha to read out his writer, then speak about the book of Mr. Khaleel Mamoon.
Good evening everyone on the stage and out there. First let me read out the message sent by Sachidanand Murthy sir. So I read it out. Dear Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh, Professor Shiv Prakash, Mr. Khaleel Mamoon, Mr. Maher Mansoor, Mr. Samvartha and poetry lovers. The release of the English translations of renowned poet Khaleel Mamoon's Gems in Urdu is an important day for Indian literature, for Indian poetry. Today's event brings the extraordinary poetic talent of Mamoon to a more linguistically diverse audience. My heartiest congratulations to the very sensitive poet whose 105 literary gems make up the literary string of this poetic pearls brought out in well-produced hardbound book. These poems present a specific dimension of the poet's sensitivity and philosophy, which can be seen as metronomic, but in another way as a laser's intense focus. The D words dominate the poetic outlook: death, devastation, disappointment, desperation, desolation, despair. There is little hope for a man or mankind as helpless souls grapple with the stunning and enervating destruction. There is a method in concentrating on how things go wrong in individual relations, communities, societies, and civilizations. The poet does not want to balance by trying to state on one hand things are bad but things are good on the other hand. Like a sledgehammer, he beats on the same damaged parts to give out his message. The pathetic human condition is a hunting ground for Khaleel Mamoon for viruses, bacteria, pathogens, fungi, which affect the system consistently, and yet his constant despair is that happy things and feelings never last, but we are overtaken by decay. On his rejection of progress and advancement, Khaleel Mamoon reminded me of the famous poem Sound of Silence, written by Simon of Garfunkel in United States half a century ago. They wrote of a modern world where people talk without speaking, hearing without listening, and writing songs that voices never share. This anthem to alienation moved generations of American youth. There are several poems which match the beauty and exhaustions of Sound of Silence. The translations are exquisite as the words and rhythm of Khaleel Mamoon are brought out without losing anything in the process. I reread the book to get the wondrous usages which were scintillating. These include nameless relics, arrows of anonymity, fog of institutions, among many other usages. Professor Shiv Prakash, ably supported by Maher Mansoor, has done an excellent work, making Mamoon's poetry glitter like a jewel-encrusted scepter. He's a polymath who has an easy affinity with culture, civilization, literatures and languages. Professor Shiv Prakash strives for perfection, but words come fluently and brilliantly from him, whether he is doing original work of translation. His writer's smithy has many a valuable tool made of diamonds and many metals, as well as powered by great intelligence and moved by empathy. Till recently I lived and worked in Delhi. I heard a lot of comments that interest in Urdu is declining, that Urdu has become an impractical language, that learning Urdu is a scholastic burden, and that there is a conspiracy to sideline Urdu for political and demographic reasons. There are concerns that Urdu's dominant situation in Bollywood films through dialogues and lyrics has been diminishing. The outcry has been getting louder and there is despair for both political and academic reasons. There is fear that Urdu is getting sidelined in Pakistan too. This is not the first time such concerns have been raised about Urdu. In 1972, in the aftermath of liberation of Bangladesh, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had set up a committee under chairmanship of Senior Minister I.K. Gujral to recommend steps for encouraging Urdu usage. Then also, there were concerns that the education system was discouraging learning of Urdu. Interestingly, Gujral and Manmohan Singh, who became Prime Ministers, both from undivided Punjab, were proficient in Urdu. I feel the current assault of Urdu for political reasons can also help the language. Urdu does not have the support of the new education policy which emphasizes on Hindi and other mother tongues as well as English. But with communication and entertainment reaching more than 70% of the population through mobile phones and their apps for music and video, there is a new interest. I met recently a group of young men from Shimoga whose mother tongue is Kannada. They had no exposure to Urdu in school or language, but they enjoyed listening to Urdu ghazals and became interested in Urdu poetry. They have no time to learn the script and are comfortable with Urdu poetry written in English or Kannada script. One of them said, there are such groups in other cities. I am sure book selling sites will cater to this growing category of non-traditional of Urdu users by making the Whispers of Saraswati and other Urdu books in English and Indian languages. Then the work of poet and the effort of the translator will get more eyeballs. Thank you. Of tears shedding your company is bringing me close to understanding of God. There is light everywhere. Defeating myself, I am moving towards you. And that's where actually kind of I wanted to end as to how actually from a certain silence it starts moving with heart and then with feet and then makes a journey almost with no station, no destination, and stands at the door of a door which doesn't open. And in that restlessness, the poet has immense faith that the door will open, but is not able to wait, but has to wait. And poetry emerges like pottery in that point, and then in that poetry, not truth emerges, a truth and a half emerges, and the poet hopes that in that even in that suffering there is meaning, and in that suffering itself will probably make the door open. And I hope that the door opens not just for the poet, but also for poetry, and also for those of us who read poetry, engage with poetry. Probably there we will find the answer as to what makes the human and what makes poetry, which will probably will not just defeat ourselves to find that other, but also probably defeat what my greatest fear is, the OS or the chat GPT, the AI, which is taking over. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Samvarta. He says he is not a student of literature, but he spoke in such a detail about the poetry of Mr. Mamoon. And rightfully you identified the qualities of his poetry: restlessness, uneasiness, confinement, attempt to have a new grammar of poetry. Thank you. अब एक शेर सुन लीजिए खलील मामून साहब का. ऐसे मर जाएं, because he spoke of life and death and silence. Actually there is one line of his title of his poem is "Silence is the best poem." और मौत के बारे में वो कहते हैं, ऐसे मर जाएं कोई नफ्स न छोड़े अपना, ऐसे मर जाएं कोई नफ्स न छोड़े अपना, याद दिल में ना हो, अखबार में तस्वीर ना हो. As you know that his selected poems have been translated by two poets, two translators, Mr. H.S. Shivaprakash and Mr. Maher Mansoor. Mr. Maher Mansoor, for some personal reason, he is not with us. So on behalf of translators, I request Mr. H.S. Shivaprakash to speak about the poetry of Mr. Khaleel Mamoon, and Mr. H.S. Shivaprakash advised me not to introduce you, and I also thought he doesn't need any introduction, so that we not waste the time, so that he can have more time to speak about the translation.
Good evening, everybody. After three brilliant responses to this book by Sri Ramakrishna, who spoke about the problems of translation in the light of his own experience of translation, and a brilliant response which Murthy ji sent to us. It's unfortunate he couldn't make it. He wanted to come, but personally he couldn't be here. That was a brilliant piece of literary criticism. These days I feel most often that literary criticism is dying. One of my young students took out, he put a question to this OTP chat, and then he took out a small essay on an eminent Kannada critic whose name I wouldn't like to mention on such a beautiful evening. And he showed me, how is this piece? I said, this must have been written by a certain Kannada critic. I named the critic also, but I don't want to name here. So then the question that Savarta asked, what's the difference between the human and the machine? And a lot of human beings are as good as machines, are as bad as machines. But if OPK chat can write poetry, I have not seen those poems, I'd like to see them. I am not sure whether the OTP chat will write poems like Khaleel Mamoon does, or any great poet does. I don't know whether OTP chat can write a great Japanese haiku by Basho or Isa, or a poem by Rumi poem by Akamadevi, Kalidasa. No. If that time comes when OPT chat is able to do as well as our great poets, then again it's not the end of humanness, it may be the sign that everything is what William Blake called human divine. So that is not it happening. And Samartha made very important, but he said he's not literary critics. I think today I've discovered he is the best literary critic in Karnataka. Now it's his responsibility to write literary criticism from now on. You write film criticism, write film scripts, also write criticism. Because engagement was not textual, it was also deeply philosophical. And it was also deeply subjective. It reminds me of some of the greatest pieces of literary criticism, like, the essays, critical essays by Walter Benjamin in Germany, or Lukács, now forgotten, Marxist critic, or Frank Mamoon in English, so on. The criticism itself becomes creative. Now, about the problems of translations, Ramakrishna has spoken. For me, every translation is a new beginning. There are no set rules. You have to discover new ways of translating. I'll just give you one example. There is a famous Japanese poem by Basho. 3-liner. The silent pond, the frog leaping in, splash. Now great poetry need not be great in length, it can be very short also. And haiku poetry is also great poetry, and so are the greatest epics of the world. Now, somebody has written in a essay 32 ways of translating Japanese haiku, quoting this. And I also tried it for many, many years. And I tried to keep the same syllable count and so on. It didn't work. Then suddenly I abandoned the project. Then suddenly it flashed in my mind, why am I not trying to translate this into Kannada meaning? And Kannada Tripadi came to me. Sappulillada kora kappe melette neredu kalala la 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 allola kallola kala. So we are now talking in our translation theory about the translations which involve equivalence between the source text and the translated text. In fact, the translation I've done here is that kind of translation. But there are so many other kinds of translations with zero equivalence, some equivalence, and complete equivalence. So I'm not going to talk about that. So what I'm trying to say is that translation is as creative as writing. And in fact, in Indian tradition, there is no difference between translation and creation. Most of the greatest works in our literature are translations of some kind or the other of earlier works. This said, I don't want to go into Khalil's poetry. These people have gone deep into it. I don't want to waste more time going into it. I've written a detailed introduction in my book and people can read it. But I'll just give two metaphors to give you some idea of Khalil's poetry. One is a quote from the mystic Rabaya Basri. She was going around with a torch in one hand and a pitcher of water in the other. And people asked her, why are you doing this? She said, with this water, pitcher of water, I want to quench the flame of hell. And with this torch, I want to set fire to paradise. A similar line we have in Allama's poetry in Kannada. ಬಲದ ಕೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ಎಡದ ಕೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಹುಲ್ಲು ಉರಿ ಹತ್ತಿತ್ತು ಗೊಗ್ಗೇಶ್ವರ ನಿನ್ನ ಶರಣನ. The torch the right hand, the hay in the left, and the Sharana brings them to one. He burns himself. Tagore also, Virahanale Jwalore ka Kotoalo, Kotayalo, Virahanale Jwalore ka Jwalo. Tagore also talks about this burning. What is this distinctive about Khalil's poetry? That kind of burning. It is the burning in purgatory or Inferno, purgatory, and sometimes, like in Divine Comedy by Dante, this fire, when he reaches paradise, it becomes light. So unless you burn, you can't see the light. And Mr. Charamati has said, he is modernist poet, of course, he is a very modernist poet, because a modernist poet is not a global poet, he is an international poet. Because there is a lot of difference between internationalism, which was the ideal of modernism, and today globalism, which is the ideal of the neo-capitalist economy. Be very clear about it. This is only bringing together the markets, but that was bringing together hearts of cultures, people from all over. So modern poetry was the first great cultural movement in world history. Its depth and extent were much greater than European Renaissance, because during Renaissance the impact was confined only to Europe, but in modernism it was worldwide. There was modernism in Africa, modernism in Latin America, in China, in India, all over. And he has been a very active translator, voluminous translator of modernist poetry. He used to run a Urdu journal called Adab. He's done a lot of translations, deeply into modernism, but he is not a modernist. He goes beyond modernism. And the most important thing said in one of his poems. So when I translated this, it was on it was already been translated by Mamoon into English, and in fact I worked for 3 months on this book. Very voluminous. In fact, this book is poems are mostly taken from the Sahitya Academy Award-winning book. I forget the title. It's about 600 pages. The Sahitya Academy Award-winning book, 600 pages, and he published poetry after some country. Somebody like him or somebody like him, and it's to be transferred.
I thank Mr. Sachidananda Murthy, Sri S.R. Ramakrishna, Sri Samvartha, and Sri H.S. Shivaprakash for having spoken about my poetry and the translation in different ways. Since I have been also translating works from other languages, and I have also delivered a lecture on the essence of translations, I fully agree with what Mr. S.R. Ramakrishna has pointed out. And while going through the literature pertaining to translations, I came through that there are certain words in various languages which are totally untranslated. So it is actually believed that the translation of literary works, particularly poetry, is not at all possible. But however, translations have been done in various languages, and various cultures have come to know about other poetries through translations alone. In this aspect, I would like to say that however appropriate a translation may not be, but it will definitely convey the essence of the translated work to the person from the other cultures, because human mind after all is one, and whatever human mind creates in whichever language it creates will definitely have similarities which the other person from the other culture will know. Mr. Samartha spoke a lot about my poetic dimensions. I really appreciate what he has stated, and probably persons interested in what he has spoken will be definitely interested in taking those points beyond. Shubprakash, in his own way and a scholarly way, has pointed out so many things about me, particularly when he spoke about progressivism. I would like to say that right since the beginning, I do not believe in the concept of progressive development, whether it is historical or temporal. There is no vertical development of culture, and it's only a nucleus of a certain thing which expands and retracts. So also I do not believe, as it is stated in Hindu philosophy and also in probably Buddhist philosophy, the existence of time the way humans perceive it and conceive it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had different calendars. Like we have the calendar which we are following is a Gregorian calendar. Still, we have Mayan calendar, Muslim calendar, Hindu calendar, and so many things. That is as far as the calendars are concerned. But the time, the way it affects human beings, and it is considered to be affecting human beings, does not exist. My argument would be, if time doesn't really exist, why do we find bodies buried in the earth for centuries to be intact when time has not affected them? So probably time doesn't exist the way we do. My concerns are definitely with the concepts of time and the concept of space and concepts of so many things which have been indirectly pointed out. And I thank all the luminaries gathered here for having spoken about my poetry. Thank you very much.
This renowned Hindi poet, writer, and he is an IPS officer. He retired as Director General of Police, and he is known for his probity and transparency, which are reflected in his poetry in the words of Mr. H. Shubprakash. Because I was not aware of these words, he advised me to please tell that he is known for his honesty, probity, transparency, and these qualities are reflected in his poetry also. So I request Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh to please address us.
Friends on the dais and of it. First of all, I must say that I am extremely happy that this translation of Khaleel Mamoon. So of course, I have always known him as Khalil Rahman. but his literary name is Khaleel Mamoon, that his poems have come out in English. I don't remember when we exactly met, but certainly in 1988. I have been listening to his poetry, and I have been an admirer of his poetry at least since 1988. And I am happy that the other poet, whom I admire very greatly, is H.S. Shiprakash, who is also present on the dais, and he is involved in the translation of the other poet whom I admire. So it's a very, very happy coincidence for me. I won't really speak much about Khaleel's poetry because enough has been said, number one. Number two, you must read and understand your own poetry, own meanings. And what others say can give some guidelines, some tips here and there, but you have to understand the poem yourself, connect to it yourself. And therefore I think I won't take much on that. But a few anecdotes maybe in order. I remember that perhaps it was 1988 or 89. There was a All India Police duty meet in Srinagar. I was appointed its manager or something like that. And I was authorized to take 2 officers of SP rank as team manager. Some designation, 2 more could come. I was DAG headquarters that time. Mr. Nizamuddin was DGP. I requested him, sir, मुझे आप खलील रहमान दे दीजिए, मैं उनको लेके जाता हूँ. बोले दूसरा, I said second is Sharat Saxena. He laughed at me, Mr. Nizamuddin. He said, why do you want these 2 officers? I told him frankly, sir, whatever police duty meet our teams are likely do, by our going or not going, is not going to make much difference. But we are 2-3 of us are good friends. We'll talk of some poetry and something that should go to 16. He was kind enough to permit us. He was kind enough to permit us, and I remember those 2-3 days. We used to leave in the morning after breakfast and roam around the खूबसूरत कश्मीर की वादियाँ and talk about some poetry, listen to his poems and listen. So, what I want to say, I have been a great admirer of Khaleel's poetry for decades. In last 2-3 years, I had the occasion of really looking into the Hindi translation. Somebody has transcribed into Hindi, and we are trying to bring it out. And therefore, I had some understanding of his poetry. But then it's my personal understanding. You may agree with it or not. But I must say that I was greatly surprised when Shiprakash ends his introduction, and if nothing else, I think this must inspire people to buy this book and read Khaleel's poetry. Shiprakash ends his introduction by saying, to say the least, this has been one of the greatest learning experiences of my life as a poet and translator. That says a lot about Khaleel's poetry. I have also found it, you see, sometimes you read a poem of Khaleel and then it has effect for days. You are in that kind of mood. Poetry generally affects me a lot, but I found Rumi's poetry and Khaleel's poetry affects me a lot. So Mr. Samvarta talked about search. I don't know, some such word he used, searching. I also found that this is one small thing about his poetry. I would like to say that Yes, there is a tremendous poet is searching in this debris of what we call dunya. तरह तरह की चीजें हैं. There is, as I said somewhere else, there are spiritual dimensions in Khaleel's poetry, but there is the daily worldly sufferings are also there. Both things are there. And poetry throughout history has been used for various purposes. And even in the classical poetics, there are many prayogens of kavya, uses of kavya, the poetry and other forms of literature. Poetry has been used to incite people to revolutions. Poetry has been used to express love, of course, most common and most strong emotions. Poetry has been used to misguide people. Poetry has been used to incite hatred. I think presently that is quite a common use of poetry. But I am not talking about that poetry. I am talking about the poetry which flows from the deepest recesses of the human heart or human psyche or the human being itself, and which has fragrance of purity, which can lead you to a better understanding of yourself, the world and the beyond. Khaleel's poetry is that type of poetry, friends. And I'm happy that through English translation, his poetry is finding a wider audience, or perhaps let me say that let a wider audience find his poetry. Mr. Mahir Mansoor and Shiprakash have done tremendous work. Actually, when I came to know this translation is being done, I was wondering, I was looking forward to see to it, because I thought it's very difficult, impossible to translate his poetry effectively. But they have done a remarkable work, the two of them. Mahir Mansoor is not present, but tremendous work they have done, and I am happy that it will perhaps find a new audience and more people will be benefited by it, because the world is, sometimes one thinks that the world is hurtling down to a situation, a very dire situation, very serious situation. And I am one of those who think that poetry can save world and humankind from that disaster. Amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh sir. You spoke with such a love and affection about Mr. Khaleel Mamoon's poetry. I feel that you will agree with me. We have a very beautiful and poetic sangam on our desk. We have one Kannada poet, H.S. Shiprakash. We have Urdu poet, Mr. Khaleel Mamoon, and Hindi poet, Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh. So we are blessed. Thank you very much for coming. At the end of this function, I request Hindi poet Srimati Manju Venkat to come on dais and thank our guest and the audience.
Shukriya, Janab Milansar Sahab. Friends, we have now reached the final part of today's book release function, the vote of thanks. A necessary formality before any event is concluded. In Urdu, we have a very beautiful word for thanks. It's called Shukriya. Very melodious and sweet translation of a commonly used word thank you. शुक्रिया आप सबका आज की इस शाम को इतनी सुंदर, खूबसूरत और यादगार शाम बनाने के लिए. We thank all of you for having taken the time to attend this event and make this a grand success. It was an honor to have Shri S.R. Ramakrishna ji here today to release the book Whispers of Saraswati, an English translation of poems by renowned Urdu poet Janab Khaleel Mamoon sahab. Thank you, sir, for your gracious presence. Our heartfelt thanks to Shri K. Sachidananda Murthy for sending his write-up on this occasion, and I must say heartiest thanks to Mr. B.A. Samvarta. He represented the younger generation, which is full of hope and promise, as we saw it today. There's a great scope and hope for the poetry and for humanity, जिसे हम इंसानियत कहते हैं. Our gratitude to Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh for presiding over the function. We thank him for all-round support for the success of today's program. Must be made for the yeoman efforts put in by the translators, Mr. Shiv Prakash and Janab Maher Mansoor Sahab, for bringing these unique gems of Urdu poetry into the realm of English literature. Congratulations and thank you, Dr. H.S. Shiv Prakash ji and Janab Maher Mansoor. Janab Khaleel Mamoon Sahab, last but not the least, the poet of the day. Thank you very much, Mamoon Sahab, for giving us all the beautiful words that we can just feel and experience and enjoy your poetry. I must say a great thank you to our compare, Mr. Milinsar Sahab, and thanks also to the teams from the media who are present here for the coverage of the event. And we once again thank all of you for your presence here today. Before we disperse, we would like to announce that a limited number of copies of the book is available at the venue. You are welcome to purchase an autographed copy of the same for yourself and your friends. And please take Mr. Mamoon's autograph. It's a unique opportunity for all of us. Happy reading. Thank you very much.